My friends, good day. Airplanes are not necessarily dangerous. What is dangerous are pilots who don't know what they're doing. Enjoy a flight with joy and good spirits without needing to add extra layers of risk. We're going to the United States, to the state of Arkansas, on January 12, 2025. We have a man, 70 years old, who is a farmer in his state. He made his fortune in tilapia, which is a fish he farms. And with this, he bought a single engine ILIS plane. It's a Balanca, actually, and it's classified by the Federal Aviation as a QLM. It's a very powerful ultralight, a bit overpowered, 180 horsepower, which makes it a lot of fun. That day, he's going to take off with two friends. The first peculiarity of this case is that they won't take off together. They're not in the same aircraft. He takes off and is followed by another similar one, also a single engine, for a formation flight. Now, formation flying, even if it's not expressly prohibited, it's still something that in serious flying clubs and schools might raise a few eyebrows among the old-timers. There's an inherent danger in flying in formation. That's why it's not recommended. They take off, and their goal that day is to fly over Frero's house. Indeed, our pilot's brother has a farm, a house, and he wants to go visit him. So flying over the house is something that is clearly and expressly forbidden. There are even, in many flying clubs, posters on the wall that say you shouldn't do that with the club's planes. And why? It's because there's a historical problem. That is to say, very often when people go to make this kind of visit to their girlfriends, their cousins, their family, well, they tend to take a lot of risks. They fly very low to stay within the visual field of what is now their audience. Well, they start making tight turns. We've seen 45, even 60 degrees just above the ground. And indeed, they can hit something, lose control, all that. So it's well known. And by the way, on this channel, there was a report published a few years ago. It takes place in Alaska. There's a man who decides to liven up his daughter's wedding a bit. And while she and her new husband are signing the register, he's going to get into his plane and start making very low passes. At some point, what will happen is that you'll hear a loud crash, a clatter of pots and pans, and the engine suddenly stops. Silence falls. And generally, that's a very bad sign because you know there's been a crash, and in fact, you're going to look for him. That's it. You'll find him in the forest dead. And so we went pretty quickly from a wedding to a funeral. And that's why it's not recommended, to avoid this kind of situation. In the end, another thing they'll do that day is fly over the family's house. Well, they have to fly over a forest, a big forest, and they decided to cross over the forest at low altitude. So we have our pilot who is in front. Behind him, there are his friends who are following him at a very low altitude, literally with the wheels brushing the tops of the trees. So at one point, his friends who see him in front of them are suddenly blinded by a blue flash, a blue light. Smoke, he goes into the smoke. They don't understand what's happening. He's disappeared. He decides to make a big circle around the scene, and there he sees him in a very awkward position. He came and got caught on an electric cable, and indeed, if you look at the satellite images of the region, you can see there are long clearings in the forest. And then, inside it, there are electric pylons carrying catenaries, large electric cables that are 40 meters above the ground. So as he circles around, he sees that indeed the Balancas is caught on a cable. He speaks on the radio. Good news, he's alive, shouting, he's not very happy. And generally, they worked as volunteer firefighters overall. The people who are shouting are out of danger. So he tells them that his arm hurts, he got injured, but otherwise he seems to be okay, even though the situation is extremely precarious. Because the device is moving with the wind, it's making noise, sinister creaking sounds, and it could come loose. So, what are these pilots going to do? Are they going to notify the control tower by radio to land them 8 kilometers away at an airfield? They come down the street, their device sputtering and making noise, and there's a guy with a pickup truck who agrees to take them to the scene. the accident. When they arrive, what do they have? The sheriff is already there. He's looking at the saddle and he's shouting to talk to the pilots. And what the sheriff is going to do is call the National Guard. So the Arkansas National Guard is ready to help, but there's still a little problem because they're being asked to send a helicopter. Helicopters, well, no, that's not the problem. They're big machines, utility helicopter, 60 types, so with 2 turbines. But the problem is that the rotors send out a lot of air. That means it's air that comes at high speed. And if they were to fly over this plane, since the wings are still largely intact, there's an aerodynamic flow. And on top of that, pretty strong forces, which could end up dislodging the aircraft. It could fall. So it's still not the solution. With a capital S, the firefighters arrive on the scene, but they have trouble getting in because the big ladder can't roll on this muddy ground full of roots, trunks, trees, and all that. So we're a bit stuck while we're thinking, and the pilot's family is about to arrive. They've been notified. Since they don't live far, they arrive, and they definitely want to take immediate action. As if there hadn't been enough action that day. So what they're going to do is they brought a rope, they brought a harness, and what they want is simply to save him right away. So what they're going to do is one of them is going to climb a pylon. He's going to throw the rope over one of the catenaries, and then they'll slide it down to the pylon. And then they tell him, go ahead, put on this harness. We're going to lower you down. So our pilot, for your information, he's stuck 40 meters above the ground. To give you an idea, the Arc de Triomphe in Paris is 50 meters tall, so it's still a pretty respectable height. And of course, he's worried because what's the risk? It's actually that the plane could come loose and fall. That could be fatal. By the way, it's actually miraculous that he escaped death during the impact, because if you look at this channel, we only have one story. And generally, it ends pretty badly. And that's one of the well-known and recognized dangers of low-altitude flying. That is to say, very often pilots who have to fly that low for professional reasons, like helicopter pilots doing aerial work and so on, most of the time, they're not just looking for cables, but also for pylons, because between the pylons, there are often cables, and pylons are easier to see than cables. Cables, just so you know, don't always come straight. They can come from the side, they can come from the left and hit, or from the right, for example. Look here, for example, if we have this cable going like this, and our plane is flying like this. Notice that the cable is coming in from the side. The cable is coming here from the right, so it can hit like this without us even seeing it. So the cable that comes straight at you is, of course, more predictable, but it's no less deadly. In any case, they managed to get his equipment back up to him, and what he's going to do is attach himself with this harness. And then they hold on to the rope and they decide to leave the aircraft. Of course, the sheriff can't do anything. There's a family, so we have to erase them. So what's going to happen is that our pilot is going to get out of the aircraft, so the rope is taut. They will slowly start to move forward, lowering him meter by meter. They manage to do the first 10 meters, but unfortunately what will happen is that around 30 meters, he will detach from his harness. How, we don't know, but we're in a do-it-yourself mindset. We're in a makeshift situation. So they improvised something when they found out he was hanging from an electric cable, and so that's it, the makeshift solution. They only had one chance to test it. Well, it wasn't the right one. That's what caused the pilot to fall from 30 meters. And then, of course, from that height, there's very little chance of a favorable outcome. So he'll end up at the medical examiner's office. There will obviously be an autopsy, as they say. It's the protocol. There's nothing special about it here. But what they're going to discover is that he had 3 different opiates in his blood. He had some pretty strong chemicals, so those are medications. And on the boxes of those, it says, warning, Do not consume if driving a vehicle, operating machinery, etc. So, what he did was he took it upon himself to take those medications. His ability to fly a plane was, let's say, impaired. It reduces concentration, it slows down reflexes, that's well known. See chemicals, it's stronger than you. But on top of all that, what's really quite frightening at the decision making level, it's that in addition to this context, which he was well aware of, well, he chose to fly in formation, to fly into a dead end attitude, and on top of that, to go after his brother's house. So, of course, at the end of this story, we have a destroyed plane, a man who died, and hundreds of homes without electricity. But the question that remains is, was this rush necessary? What does that mean? If the family hadn't rushed to get him out of that situation at all costs, very quickly, by taking maximum risks, would the plane have crashed on its own at some point or not? Well, I can tell you one thing, it's that. The accident happened on January 12, and the plane was brought down by the power company on February 4, 3 weeks later. For 3 weeks, the aircraft stayed hanging there. And how did they bring it down? Actually, what they did was they went onto one of the pylons, they detached the cable, with a crane after, of course, de-energizing it, and they lowered it to the ground. That was it. That's the only way to work. They took the pylon, they put guy wires on it, they reinforced it. Why? Because the pylon is balanced by the cables pulling it from each side. So if we start to detach cables, we're going to create more tension on one side than the other. So what they did was add more guy wires. After doing that, they detached the cable and they lowered it to the ground with a crane. When lowering this cable, well, it touched the ground and the plane as well. So there was horror, a risk that the aircraft might detach by itself. And generally, in this kind of situation, it's better not to overreact and make things worse. The aircraft was thoroughly analyzed by the Transportation Safety Board. There was absolutely no problem with the control continuity. The engine was working properly. There was no issue. So we're still in a situation where it's not the plane. The plane itself just needed to be flown according to proper procedures. But in fact, once again, it's about human decisions with extremely unfortunate consequences. Thank you, my friends, for watching this video up to this point. Please subscribe, click on the little button and the little bell. It lets me see that you appreciate my work and it encourages me for the next videos. Thanks also to those who support this channel on Patreon. It also allows them to access some exclusive videos. And I'll see you in the next one very soon.